Yes, so we work a lot with Pierre when you were MP. We are currently working a lot because even if France will lead the blockchain system, there are many things to do. So we are a professional association, and our goal is to federate and to represent all the champions that will build the Web3 industry in France, in Europe, and on the international stage. So we are currently building regulation. We are currently raising all the deadlocks that newcomers raise facing the incumbents when they want to bring innovation. We are doing a lot of education, and such events is really important, really crucial for this effort. But we can say that already today, France is becoming the haven for crypto champions who want to expand to Europe because of all the work that France has already done regarding regulation, but also because we have authorities that are really experts about crypto assets and who know the industry, know the companies, and more are understanding that it is strategic that we build in France and in Europe the industry that will actually change our daily lives tomorrow.
Alain, you are our collective intelligence about a subject that is much more broader, which is fintech. Can you please
I'm scared to death to be your collective intelligence. Anyway, I'm Alain Clos, I'm chairing France FinTech, that happens to be the non-profit association gathering and representing fintechs in France. We're talking on their behalf to the government, the MPs, some time ago to the gentleman seated there, and some others, to the European Commission, and obviously putting people together so that we create champions, a very sustainable ecosystem in France and in Europe with a global perspective, which is to say to export our talents to the rest of the world. We've got 300 members, and maybe a few facts and figures at this stage about the global ecosystem. The fintech ecosystem in France happens to be the second largest in Europe in terms of almost every parameter. We've got 40,000 jobs, out of those over 12,000 created this very year. We have a second largest in terms of fundraising. We've raised since January 2 billion euro, which put ourselves in a second position next to the UK and by almost 30%. We've got 11 unicorns. We are by far the largest tech sector in France within the global picture of technology. And also we've got already 10, 20-ish champions capable of obviously taking a leader position in Europe and sometimes elsewhere, including in crypto. The Ledger, the Sorare, etc. Are already visible at a global level. And maybe a few words on facts on crypto without that. As Faustine mentioned, crypto accounts for roughly 11% of the whole population, over 2,000 jobs, and moreover, 7 out of the 10 main fundraising transactions in Europe this year were performed by French players, which is to say we're already at the center of the European sector. Obviously, our vision covers the rest of the world, but it's a good beginning to say.
And Stéphanie.
Thank you, Alain. So I joined Binance a few months ago, and I'm in charge of boring stuff, legal, compliance, public affairs. But before that, I participated to draft the regulatory framework for France, and I worked a lot with Faustine and Pierre, because I was working at the French Financial Markets Authority. I was Deputy General Counsel there, and basically for the last 3 years, we all worked together with the French ecosystem to build a sound regulatory framework for crypto assets. And what is the specificity of France in that is that we have struck, I think, a good balance between investor protection and the competitiveness of a young sector, a not mature sector, which needs to be encouraged, nurtured, in order to grow and to expand in Europe as well.
Thank you. Alors, to really see what happens those following years and what happened on the blockchain ecosystem, we see the arrival of unicorn on blockchain and on the forefront we see a lot of French actors. We see the interest of Binance and many other exchanges to invest in France, to invade France and to make it a hub. How could you explain what has been done and what are the reasons of this success of the magical formula? I see a sense of the solution here when I see that basically we have the people who wrote the law, the people who work on the market, the people who are a young country, and the government in the same table today.
I think the best approach is to speak about the technology and regulate the object or the use cases and not the technology. When blockchain start and company grew up and some startup was built in France, the technology was very, very young. And they were ICO, you remember? And we doesn't know at this stage what will be this technology and what will be the use cases in the future. Right now, we discover some use cases in DeFi, in finance, about payment, and we know pretty well what will be the future, but we doesn't know yet the strict use cases. So you have to be patient. You have to regulate the whole landscape of the technology, but you must assure that it will not cancel the innovation. And I think it's the difference between good and bad regulation. The good regulation install stability, increase the innovation, let the players, the entrepreneurs to build around this technology. The bad regulation is regulation that is translating old regulation without understanding what is the concept and the new paradigm and how it is working. So we are trying our best to do the first approach and to regulate and to do maybe next framework in the future about new use cases. But right now, I think we try our best to not over-regulate, but maybe to be balanced.
I think it's really important what you're saying, and that's why we need that companies and use cases be more visible than just talking about blockchain technologies and crypto assets. And I think, just to jump on what you said, Stephanie, what we did well in France is that we set a regulation, but that was dedicated to, let's say, financial use cases around crypto assets. And that's why we were quite scared during the MiCA debates, because the regulation that was being built, we were afraid that it went too far on those use cases who are not financial ones. So, for example, NFTs, use cases around NFTs, not all are financial ones. And we can say that on this aspect, EU followed the approach of France, and that's a very good thing. On the other financial use cases, you were mentioning DeFi, also we did not went too far in France. We were scared that we went too far during the EU debate by supervising DeFi like centralized finance, and finally we did not. So I think we were really, we paved the way to EU regulation with this bright understanding that behind crypto assets and Web3, there are really diverse use cases, and that if we have to set a regulation, we need not to be too in a hurry, because actually we know the unicorns, but behind the unicorns, the temple of companies who are building those Web3 applications today are small companies, small and medium companies, and that they still need to structure and they still need to grow. And that if we have a regulation that is too burdensome, actually we will hamper the development of those companies. So we don't have to be in a hurry. And we have to really understand what we are regulating, and that it can be behind crypto assets, really diverse use cases.
Maybe a few words to add on those. I fully agree what has been done, including what you just said, Faustine. Fundraising valuation is not everything. It's a tool. It's a way to progress and not the objective. But I would mention a couple of parameters. First one is that we are operating as an ecosystem. We are talking a lot to each other. We're talking a lot to the authorities, to Europe, etc. We have very much structure, which is to say, not very French in terms of tradition, being very selfish and working in isolation. In that case, since the beginning, we've been working together, structuring ourselves. And if we compare the French ecosystem versus our main equivalent in Europe, and according to the European Commission that told us recently, you are by far the most structured one. And sometimes it's not easy because obviously we are talking to the government, sometimes we disagree, we're talking to the regulator and supervisor, and often we disagree, but we are working together throughout proper structure. The second parameter I'd like to add is that we are working a lot to support the demand. There is a demand in France. One piece of figure strikes me is the fact that 8% of French citizens, adults, are owning cryptos in France, which is to say significantly more than equities. And it says something, and 3.2% already bought NFTs. Maybe some of them need to be more educated so that they do understand really what they are obviously doing. And we're working a lot on the educational side, which is key. But clearly there is a substance, there is a market, and we're working a lot on that together.
Yeah, I wanted to build up a little bit, elaborate on the notion of ecosystem, because to have a sound regulation, what is important is to have a bottom-up perspective. It's not possible to regulate blockchain from the top, because all the regulators, the public authorities, but don't know as well as the private actors how it works. And one of the strengths in France is that we were able to have this bottom-up approach by having public consultations, asking basically companies how they want to be regulated, drafting text, and then ask them to add their input. And this is how something sound was written. We have done that, I think, for crypto assets, of our normal crypto assets. Now we need to do it for NFTs and DeFi, because those two parts are excluded from MiCA regulation, so from the European regulation, as stated the French minister at the beginning. It's excluded, but we need to think collectively on a good way to regulate, maybe, if it's needed, those products and those use cases as well. And what Binance is trying to give is maybe to expand the scope of this ecosystem from a French ecosystem to a European ecosystem. It's something I would really want to do, is to say that the first discussions about crypto regulation started in France, but now we need to have these discussions with all European actors and bring this bottom-up knowledge to the regulators and to the public authorities.
Yeah, and we had the chance to see it with Italy and Spain, where after following France, we were registered and I assisted to the discussion. I think we are never going to be able to avoid this subject, so let's make it fast, and then let's not speak about regulation anymore, if you all agree. Mika, what's your take on, what's your opinion? Alors maybe we can begin by Stéphanie and then come back to Pierre. I know, Pierre, where you're going to lead. I'm going to lead you the conclusion note on this.
Alors, the main difference of MiCA, between MiCA, so the European regulation, and the French regulation, is that MiCA is compulsory, is mandatory for every crypto asset service provider, whereas in France, some part is still optional. And it was thought like a label to encourage serious companies, serious projects to comply with regulations. But now that the industry has grown up, at the European level, it's mandatory. I think it's a good thing because it will bring more protection to consumers, to investors, but nevertheless, it will be a huge step for most of the crypto assets providers. Alors, MiCA will enter into application in roughly 2 years, but in the meantime, we all need to be prepared to this big step. And one possibility, as the minister said at the beginning, is to go through the French optional regulation to be able to meet the requirement, the standards of the future European regulation. And I hope that everybody in Europe will hear that, every actor, because it's a significant way to help us collectively to apply the future MiCA standards.
I know it's not very popular among youngsters and young entrepreneurs, but regulation is both compulsory and necessary. We do need to protect the consumer, the investor, and the market globally. Otherwise, we'll end up with some big issues. Actually, it applies to every single financial transaction, whether it's investment, borrowing, payment, etc. We can do our best to turn regulation into an opportunity. And we're working on that. MiCA is the first step. It's not perfect. We've got a debate among us, especially with Pierre. But we do think it's a base on which we can build up something which is not only compatible with innovation, but that suscitates innovation. And there are some precedents. For those of you that are familiar with payments, PSP2 is a revolution. It's not a piece of regulation. It's ahead of innovation. It's increasing innovation. And with MiCA 2 and so on, we need obviously to work on that. Let's not forget that the Europeans are putting a lot of constraints on players, sometimes too much, but also they invented something which is absolutely amazing. There are two things I'm very impressed by. First one is this system of exchange of students between universities, which is a wonderful European creation.
Erasmus?
Yes, Erasmus. Second one is regulatory passporting. Once you get regulated in one given country of the Union, you get access to, which is by far the largest market on earth, 500 million consumers and investors throughout Europe, with a high level of investment capacity, which is to say we've got in front of us by far a market which is much bigger than the US, much bigger than China, and we have to work on that. So we got to turn it into something which is as much protective to the consumer, investor, and the market, but also innovation-friendly, which is our debate.
So yeah, on the one hand, MiCA is positive for especially French companies because as of today, regulation is not harmonized, and French companies and the companies that target the French markets are the more regulated. And till now, it was quite complicated for them to understand the benefits of being regulated before the other one. So with MiCA, with the harmonization of EU rules, it will restore level playing field. So the conditions of competition will be the same for everyone. And as Alain said, it will also help to expand to Europe because you will get a passport, you're being registered with your national authority, but then you can expand your activity to all other member states. So it's positive. And it's also positive because MiCA could have been really worse than what it will be. For example, I was already talking about DeFi and NFTs who won't be regulated under MiCA. So it gives some time to think about the appropriate regulation because you're right, there will be regulation. And neither DeFi nor NFTs will remain unregulated. That's why the industry must be part of the debates right now because regulators, EU regulators, are currently thinking about this regulation. So we do need to support this work. Otherwise, it would be done without us. So it could have been worse, but there are big issues, big topics, big problems in MiCA. The main one is about stablecoins, because there will be a dedicated regime for stablecoins that is really strict and that will probably prevent from the development of euro stablecoins. And that is a matter of digital and monetary sovereignty that we have euro stablecoins issued by European actors. But the regime that will be built in MiCA is unadapted, is disproportionate. So it's one of our main concerns, and that's why we still need to support what's being done, because MiCA needs to be drafted. There will be technical discussions going on. So we have to avoid that it is really, really burdensome. And maybe one other issue is about the possibility of a level playing field and illegal competition from foreign actors because we are talking about regulation, but we have to speak about supervision too. If we have rules, we need someone to ensure that those rules apply to everyone. And we are afraid that international leaders, international actors who don't comply with the EU regulation can anyway target the European market. So that would be really unfair, and actually it would be counterproductive with the objectives that regulation is aiming at, like investor protection, but we can also speak about anti-money laundering, about the fight against financial crime. So we do have to take care that EU standards become universal on the international stage, and that we have fair competition everywhere.
I'm pretty agree with that. On the one hand, regulation is mandatory to protect interest, public interest. I think we are all agree in this room that the state of DeFi is not satisfied right now when we see some bad behaviors, some actors, and maybe because we need to protect the weakest part of the contract. My grandmother don't know how to read a smart contract, and at the end of the day, DeFi is about it. And we need to protect people from bad actors. In the other hand, regulation is not mandatory. I think doesn't have to be created to protect monopoly and banking monopoly. And that it is the point about the regulation. I think we need a smart regulation to increase the innovation, not to protect monopoly. And when I read MiCA and I start to educate some policymakers in Europe, Commission, Parliament, when I read this text, I see just a translation about the actual nowadays regulation about bank. And you can't regulate DeFi, Web3 with the same tool that bank. And this is my point. I think on many aspects, there is a good aspect in MiCA. I think on VSAP, it's okay. Stablecoin is very, very, very tough. Because when you speak about sovereignty, EU sovereignty, you need to have European issuer of stablecoin. And what we see, it's not a problem for American, but right now the only one big issuer of stablecoin, European stablecoin, Euro stablecoin, it's quite American, and it is regulated by the American regulator. It's a point for me, because when you ask our company, when you ask our policymaker to fight for the sovereignty of Europe, you need to accord to be right with the aim of the policy. So there is good things, maybe bad things, and maybe there will be change in the future. It's my sweat.
Alain?
Just for the sake of being a bit less positive, because we are too positive today, regulation should not be looked at as a single subject, homogeneous. There are three aspects, three very different aspects we should consider. First one is the rule itself, MiCA, discussed by the whole of Europe, and then set up at the central level in Europe. We've covered that, but then there are two other aspects that are much more complicated to fine-tune. Second one is transposition. And there is a bad habit in this country, which is to over-transpose, which is to say to add rules on rules in the way we are understanding the central rule. And we've got all of us very concrete aspects in mind on payments, on banking license, etc. And then we are a bit scared that once again, we add constraint to the constraint. And the third one being the supervision. Actually, we are calling our local regulators, to an extent, they are more and more supervisors, since the regulator, up to 80, 90%, is at the central European level. And then the way the supervisors are looking at the way you're meeting the rule is very different from one country to another, so that there is some arbitrage, regulatory arbitrage between countries. We've seen that on KYC, and anti-money laundering, etc. So let's not forget the two other aspects, because very often the evil is there. Not much the rule that should be set up, innovation-friendly and not opening unfair competition, but also transposition and supervision.
Now, we spoke about regulation. Let's clear the air on regulation now and never speak about it again, please. But so we have accomplished a lot of things in France, and we are just at the beginning of a new chapter and a new adventure. We saw a winds of change between Web 2 and Web 3 in terms of position, and where we are going to position ourselves, what is the opportunity. But what are the next big challenge for us to really make the tryout?
I think it's democratize. It's invention. It's imagine the new use cases for people, for humanity. Binance is one of the actors, but we need more use cases. Not just about investment, about day-to-day use cases. And I think it's when you will see the blockchain disappear, that will have accomplished a part of this journey. So I think democratization is the best way to build this ecosystem right now.
I think we still need to convince about the opportunities and the potential behind Web3 applications. And there are still many preconceived ideas that are circulating about crypto assets and that hamper newcomers on this market and mass adoption. And we are still attacked on lots of topics. And I think the main one that is raising more and more with the geopolitical context is about the environmental impact. And we know that France is looking right now and working on a report to be released to the parliament in November about the environmental impact of crypto assets. And we know that the European Commission will need to do so. And maybe to take provisions dedicated to our industry to limit the environmental impact. But this work is led by the bad understanding of the crypto asset functioning, the differences between protocols that are not really known, the interests of such protocols in terms of security. And that's why you were talking about education. This is really important. If we can debunk those bad ideas, we have to understand what is the potential, what are the opportunities, because if we explain that crypto asset does not pollute, it doesn't answer the question that is still the main one when we are speaking to policymakers, regulators, why crypto assets expect speculation. So we do need to go on those education efforts and to convince that this is changing deeply our daily lives tomorrow.
Very quickly, two additional points. First one is education. Education is everything. And keeping in mind, in this country, people have got a special relationship with finance. When I say special, it's very often negative. There is a negative perception. For one basic reason, historical one. We're not more stupid than the rest of the world, but French have put a lot in common, retirement schemes, etc. Therefore, each one of us hasn't got so much time and energy to dedicate to the management of my long-term future, which is not the case in the US, in the UK, etc. So education. Second one is creating champions. We've got a French way to do it. Our vision is Europe and the rest of the world. But we've got to create significant players. I remember the days where we had beautiful things done a very competent way, huge competence in cognitive science, algorithm, etc. But very little players, for Edna in French. And we want to get rid of that. We want to be operating with profitable, sustainable sound players, and we've got our way to, and I want students, I want to work here in those specialties to be able to do it, and also to export themselves elsewhere. But if they want to get back or to start here, it's got to be possible. So all of us have to work on that.
I agree with everything that has been said. The next step is mass adoption. And for me, there are two things for that. Prerequisites, first education, and second, sorry David, regulation. First education, because we need to educate the mass of the population about a lot of things, about AML, about environmental impact, about how blockchain works. You know, on AML, most of the people don't know that now crypto asset service providers need to apply the same regulation that BEX. Voilà. A lot of people don't know that, so it's by explaining that we will encourage mass adoption. On environmental impact, today there will be the merge in the Ethereum blockchain, which will lead to 99% of decrease of CO2 emissions and environmental impact. It's a very positive thing for blockchain because it will reduce the environmental impact of blockchain. And I think that a lot of people don't know about that. So that's why Binance has a lot of actions in education. There is a collaboration with a lot of schools in French, with the school Simplon, as CZ and the minister said previously, which is the top tech school in France. We have also collaboration with business schools, ESSEC, HEC, etc. So it's very critical for the next step of blockchain. And the second thing is regulation, because for me, there will be no mass adoption if there is not a level of confidence, of trust on the blockchain technology and on the exchanges, etc. We absolutely need to demonstrate that there is a sufficient level of investor protection, and the steps currently taking place in the French regulation and European regulation, are going in the right direction.
Now, we have 5 minutes, 30 seconds, so we're going to be mindful of the time. But what would be, in 1 minute each, your advice for the next generation of people that enter into the blockchain or create company on blockchain subject, or are just here today, as I was here in front of you, Pierre, in 2017? For example, what would be the advice you would give them in order to conclude this session on the French example?
It's easy to come and stay in France. I think it is the best way to build. I think the ecosystem will grow up with builders, with entrepreneurs, not just investors, but this type of person. And I think it's very important to build the next champions, like Alain said, in France.
Austin, you're leading a generation of new players.
So yeah, to take part in the dynamics that the French industry had already launched, and not to get discouraged about the stumbling blocks that they will encounter. Actually, we are trying to raise them, so just trust us to try to help you. But there are all the good conditions for French companies to be to trust the future, even if there are still many things to do. So it would be great that we build French champions rather than foreign champions.
Two pieces of advice. First one, focusing on the business case, on monetization and technology as a way to meet the target and not being per se the target. And the second one is to build up team. We've run some surveys on success cases and some kind of mini sociology of successful entrepreneurs within the fintech ecosystem. Team is everything. Actually, as an investor, teams account for 80% of the parameters you're taking to make your own decision. So to meet the right people at the right time and to work on a business case, to make a long story short.
My advice to the next generation would be trust yourself. Because I am really amazed in this economic sector. I've seen very talented people, really. I was amazed when I was at the IMF because a lot of people were coming to the regulator to present their project and asking for what is the regulatory framework they need to apply. And I was really amazed to see all these talents. I would say in France, but in blockchain in general, the next generation is very skilled from a technical point of view and is also very creative. And it's something that we need in this new frontier of the technology. So really keep on, continue, trust yourself, and I'm sure that it will work.
Thank you, everyone. Alors, few interf advice from my part as well. The first one is be smart, not clever. Go fast. Don't go perfect, but go fast. There is a first-time mover advantage in blockchain right now. It's not the people that create the perfect protocol in one shot. It's the people that create the first iteration that gets the lion's share. And moreover, you don't know where you're gonna be in 1 year. Things in blockchain move really fast, so you need to deliver fast the product you're working on. Why? Because in 2 months, maybe the context is totally different. Maybe the trend is on another subject or on this. The last advice, and I want to thank all the Binance angels that are here with us, is community driven. If you are community driven, you're going to succeed in everything you do in blockchain, because at the end of the day, blockchain is right now more a community than for now a very economical sector in a way. And that's by communities that you begin with. So here my last word. Does anyone want to add any last word?
Maybe a word to thank Binance. You guys have been quite committed to our market. It took us some time and energy together to convince CZ to pick up Paris as opposed to Frankfurt or London. I understand you've already recruited 200 staff in 1 year, investing significant money. So it's exactly what we want, the game to be played here, to create jobs, to commit to the environment together. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for those great insights and those last pieces of advice. Hopefully we can all put that into action pretty quickly here. Up next, we're talking about regulation. I know it's been sprinkled in a few of the panels and the opening talks, but now we have a panel of experts who are really going to dive into this topic because it is really crucial for driving crypto adoption. So, change your seats if you need to, stretch your legs if you need to, and if you're staying, have a seat and join me in welcoming our next panel, who is going to be moderated by Hugo Colo, Binance's Director of European Affairs. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. You've been talking a bit about regulation. I think we'll continue on that topic and take a bit of a deep dive now. Let me start by thanking Peter, Teodoro, and Armel for joining the discussion. It's a pleasure to moderate this panel. So crypto is under the spotlight of regulators. This is not new exactly, but it's sort of intensified over the past few months, I would say. In in a year or so, crypto issuers and exchanges in Europe will be fully regulated, and regulators are now thinking about what to do about DeFi and really tackling the difficult issue of the decentralization. Now, regulation, as others have said this morning, is sort of a double-edged sword. You get it wrong, and it can stifle innovation. If you get it right, then it can instill confidence and support the growth of the industry. So the difficulty, obviously, is how do you strike a balance? Europe, because Europe is front-running most other jurisdictions in introducing rules for the sector, the stakes are higher here. Basically, if we get this right, we can certainly attract a big chunk of the industry, as we seem to be doing, especially in Paris, and we can set the global standard. But if we get this wrong, then there's a risk that Europe will miss the next wave of financial innovation. So this is the background for the conversation. On this note, I will invite the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with Peter next to me.
I am Peter Kerstens. I'm advisor at the European Commission's Department for Financial Services, and I'm often referred to as the spiritual father of the European MiCA regulation. Now, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, I leave in the middle. If MiCA is a success, I'm happy to be referred to as one of its instigators or one of its motivators. If it's a failure, I think it's going to be an orphan.
Theodore?
A pleasure to be here. I'm Teodoro Garcia. I'm a member of Spanish Parliament. 6 years ago, I discovered blockchain and never be the same. I give some conference, I study a lot, but for the last 4 years, I'm in charge of the Secretary General of the People's Party, that's the first party in Spain. And now I leave this responsibility and I want to promote the blockchain and the crypto asset market for improving the people's life.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Armel Castet, the head of the Financial Markets and Savings unit at the French Treasury, so here in Paris. And my unit is covering the regulation of cryptos. Also, I kind of lost my voice yesterday, but I hope you can still hear me.
Well, we hear you very well, and I hope it will remain like that. And let me start with you for as long as your voice lasts, since you're also the host in a sense. So France was one of the first movers in introducing a regulatory regime for crypto, as we've heard earlier. Not only you moved fast, but you've also introduced a bespoke regime. So it was not just about extending rules for financial markets to crypto. In hindsight, what difference did that make?
Well, I think it's a very good question because we are quite proud actually that we managed to move very rapidly on that front. And one has to recognize that it was not that easy. And I think the best achievement is quite simple but still very important, is that it created this relationship between the public authorities on one side and the regulator and the ecosystem on the other side. And the learning curve, we have to be very frank about it, was steep. Because basically we are financial markets experts on one side, or financial services experts maybe, but we are not crypto experts. And at the time, the skills within the administration was fairly limited. So we got to know each other to understand what the crypto world and the crypto community was. And also it helped to structure a little bit on basically the crypto community side, our interlocutors. Also, and it has been mentioned this morning by Minister Barrot and Sisi, but I think it's very important to say our regulators also built up some skills, and we think it's a big advantage now that we will have a European framework, because players tell us, and basically Binance told us, it was part also why they chose Paris. It was because if you go to IMF and ACPR, they already know how to license a crypto player. And they also created relationships with other authorities worldwide. And it's very important because obviously activities of Binance are international. So I think it was a great signal to tell all the crypto players that public authorities were open to cryptos, and we wanted to do it right with our regulators having a close look at this activity, but still that Paris will be a welcoming environment.
Let me take that cue to pass the baton to Peter. So you said you're known as the intellectual father of Mika. In the previous panel, people talked a lot about the details, so I'll ask a forward-looking question. How much will Mika change the industry in 2 years when it comes into force? How will crypto have changed?
Whether the regulation will change the crypto sector, I don't really know. I tend to be of the view that we shouldn't overestimate the impact of regulation on society or on the economy. I think that there's so much dynamism and so much drive in this sector that it will determine its own future. But in coming forward with this regulation, with this proposal for this regulation, we really wanted to onboard crypto activity in the European Union and to organize and to determine a mind shift among policymakers and regulators that blockchains and crypto have enormous potential and that we in Europe should seize this potential. Of course, this requires legal certainty, this requires rules of the game, and we set these rules, but these rules are just a bit like traffic rules. They determine whether you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road, on the right-hand side of the road, where you have to stop, but they don't really change the cars. They may impose a speed limit, but they don't really do more than that. The design of the cars is for the industry, the car manufacturers.
I think that's a very nice metaphor. Theodore, I would like to tap on your experience on tech policy more generally. What lessons can we glean from the experience of regulating, say, the internet? What is the read across to crypto? In particular, when is the right time for regulators to step in and to provide these rules so that they provide clarity but do not stifle innovation?
I think that we have a lot of work to do together, regulators and actors on the crypto ecosystem. But now we have to think that the role of all people who are working on crypto is to develop a self-regulation. I think that now we are in a fragmented world. Actually, we don't have a regulation, an homogeneous regulation for internet, and we are 30 years, 20 years on internet. And now we are talking about money, we are talking about investment, and that is very important for the growth of the countries, and that is why we are now here talking about regulation, because we are talking about money. So the first thing that we have to do, and that is why I think that this is a good idea from Binance to organize this event, is to self-regulate ourselves from the point of view of get safer for the investors and also for promoting the innovation. We have to think about technological regulation, not only financial regulation. And if we think about internet makes possible to send, for example, 20,000 mails in 1 minute, and that was not possible 20 years ago. Now we are open new business through crypto. Imagine a subscription of 0.05 per each. The lower cost of transaction allow us to increase the economical growth of countries and of regions. So reducing 0.1 the cost of transaction will increase by 4 times the wealth of a nation, of a region. We have to take it into account. We have to self-regulate. We have to protect investors, and also we have to promote the innovation, because we are in a global world, and if any country make a bad regulation, then will be against their citizens, because the innovation look for other countries.
So let me pick up on that to sort of take a leap forward. When we talk about MiCA, we're talking about regulating issuers and centralized service providers, centralized exchanges. But crypto, or at least a fundamental concept in crypto, is decentralization, which is totally out of scope, or hopefully totally out of scope of MiCA. I suspect most people in this room would argue that decentralization is really a condition to achieve the true potential of the blockchain technology. There's probably little point in blockchain if we don't go down the road of decentralization. But at the same time, policymakers have been struggling a lot with this concept. And in Europe, even though there's been a lot of agreement to move forward with MiCA, whenever the idea of decentralization comes on the table, there's a lot of pushback. And we've seen that with the discussions on hosted wallets and similar ones. So is it that regulators do not recognize the benefits of decentralization at all? Or is it the case that in weighing the benefits and risks, they just see more risks than benefits? I will want your views. Well, we can start with Peter. It's a tricky one.
Well, I'll speak for myself. I definitely see the advantages of decentralization. And I'm not saying that decentralization should be regulated or can be regulated. If it has to be regulated, I wouldn't know today how to do it wisely. If we look at the MiCA regulation, it does not cover decentralization. So take, for example, the Bitcoin blockchain, which is a clear example of decentralization. The Bitcoin blockchain as such is not regulated. But MiCA does cover what I call DINOs, decentralization in name only. So if you're a DINO, then you may actually, or you very likely are going to be covered by MiCA. What I mean with DINOs are intermediaries who use decentralizing technologies to provide services or activities. So, to sum up, the Bitcoin blockchain is not regulated because we don't want to regulate it, and we can't regulate it because there is no person, no entity to regulate. But people who provide services towards Bitcoin, who provide wallet services, people who provide, so intermediaries who provide wallet services, people who provide intermediary services as a broker or as an exchange, those are entities that are centralized entities that you can regulate. If you have a exchange which is purely a protocol, it's only a protocol which operates within a DAO, it is extremely difficult to regulate, and up until now impossible, because regulation is always administered through persons, to entities. It are the persons and the entities that are the subject of the regulation, not the protocol or the technology. And we feel very strongly that we shouldn't regulate the technology as such.
I want to hear the opinion of the other panelists on this, but let me just ask you a practical question. Process-wise, how does a regulator think about this? What are the steps? Because again, this is going to be presumably a big thing. And the Commission, there's many people in Brussels that have been encouraging the Commission to think about what to do about DeFi. So how do you, recognizing the limits and the problem of accountability and identifying the entities, what's the process? How do you do that?
Well, indeed, and the MiCA regulation also asks the Commission to come forward with a report on this to see if the decentralized part should be regulated and how. But before you decide to regulate something, you have to establish that there is a problem, and that can be all kinds of problems, societal problem, a financial stability problem, a market integrity problem. But first of all, you have to establish, is there a problem? And secondly, you have to demonstrate that regulation is a solution to that problem. And that's the way we think about it. So far, we do not see a financial stability problem in decentralized finance. There are some market integrity questions about decentralized finance, but purely decentralized finance is actually quite niche, it's very small. Most of it is really in the dino space. But if this problem is material and significant and should be addressed, then we'll have to think about how can we regulate this decentralized environment that's creating this problem. And for that, you will need to find a hook into that decentralized space, because you can't regulate the code. We are a society based on the rule of law, so it's not that we're into banning activities. We can't say to all Europeans, you are not allowed to engage with decentralized protocols. That's just simply not possible. So we would have to find what I would call on-ramps and off-ramps into these decentralized protocols that could be the entry points, or that could be the targets of regulation. I'm speculating here now because we haven't reached a conclusion at all that this is necessary. No. That will be something we will be looking at.
But it's reassuring to hear about the process and the steps taken. I want to hear your opinion on this, and including on the new acronym, the DINOs, if you have any views on that. So perhaps Teodoro, or...
Okay. Three things. First of all, we have to explain better. Explain better, because less than 1% of people who are now sitting on parliaments, trust me, I'm with them, less than 1% knows about decentralized finance, about all crypto ecosystem. So we have to explain it better, because for regulation, it's important to point out that the crypto assets are censorship resistant and borderless. If you don't know that the crypto assets are censorship resistant, you make mistakes regulating those type of assets. For example, we have the SWIFT system banned to Russia, and now some people are using decentralized crypto to make some transactions. So we have to take into account the characteristic of decentralized finance to do that. Now regulations are focused on centralized system, but ABE are lending more than 7,000 euro per day. This is an incredible amount of money, not euro, dollars. Because now I think that we have to make an extra effort from Europe in order to win against the dollar, or to fight, not to fight, but to get a better position with the dollar. Because if we cannot build up new stable coins, if we cannot do something like DAI or something like the private stable coins, we are losing a position like Europe, like region, like countries that wants to take part of the crypto ecosystem. So that is my point of view. The top of the iceberg is that we are doing now, but we have to think about MiCA 2, the ramp, in order to create a good ecosystem for the growth of Europe. So three things. One, explain better what are we doing. Two, self-regulation of the decentralized finance. Self-regulation is good for the protocols, it's good for the enterprise, and it's good for people who own crypto assets or tokens. And third one, show how crypto benefits all people. That is the three points that I want to point out.